In this recording, we're going to take a look at one of the first advanced functions that I think is very, very valuable, and that's the lookup function. Lookup functions and data tables go together quite well. They don't always have to go together, but generally there's some kind of long list of data like my grade records here, and by the way, I'm using the GPA calculator or the Unit 5 GPA calculator. If you didn't follow along with the first two recordings, you'd probably be okay. But I'm using the GPA calculator, which is what was left after I did Unit 2 data validation. If you didn't do the Unit 2 recording with me, then you won't see this yellow box, but you should still be able to put your cursor in cell B3. What I want the user to be able to do is enter an 8-digit ID number here, and then my spreadsheet is going to figure out how many classes have they completed, what's their name, what program are they in, how many total credits, and what's their total GPA points. Actually, I think I want this completed courses to be down here, so I'm going to move it. Let's put it there, insert a row, and take this one out. Had that in the wrong spot, that's all right. Okay, so we want to know how many classes. With this stuff we're going to add up. We're going to count, and then ultimately calculate their GPA. But what I want them to be able to do is enter an 8-digit ID number here and have the spreadsheet automatically go in here and find all the courses for that student. Automatically go in here and find the student's name and the program they're in. This is done using a lookup. We look up a value in this column and then return or send back one of these values. We look up a value in this and then return one or more of these values. So that's a lookup function. That's its purpose. They come in very, very handy. Lookups come in three flavors. There are vertical lookups, all of my lookups in here. Here's another one that looks up grades and how many points they're worth. All of my lookups are vertical lookups. They go up and down. If we turn this sideways and have the ID numbers across the top and the names and the last names and the programs down the side, that would be a horizontal lookup. The book gives a couple of examples of those. I lean toward the horizontal lookup. There's also an older version from the old versions of Excel called just a lookup in general. I'm going to be using a vertical lookup. So the first thing I need, as my little tip here tells me, is I need a student ID number. I know that all of mine start with 100, and let's just go to 0005. And the first thing I want to do, remember we added data validation, so if you don't give it an 8-digit ID number, it complains. But the first thing I want to do is look up the program. You might want to do the student first, but that's a little more complicated because of what I'm going to do something fancy there, so we'll save that one. We'll do a simple lookup to start with. When you're doing these advanced functions, when you're first getting used to them, the easiest way to get them is to go to the FX and look to see if they're in their most recently used list. The one I want is called VLOOKUP or vertical lookup, and it's not there. So I'm going to type in it here. I'm going to do a search for my lookup functions. Go. And here's all kinds of columns and vertical lookups and a lookup function, and there's probably an H lookup. There it is. The one I want is the vertical lookup function. I like these help dialog boxes because they tell you the information that you need to complete this function. This function has up to 4 different pieces of information that it needs in order to calculate its result. The bold ones are required. The ones that are in lighter face are optional. You can put them in if you want to. Anytime you're on one of these boxes, there's help down here that tells you what it's looking for. So if you forget what comes in there and you can't find my notes, or you don't want to go get my notes, you can figure out new functions by reading what's supposed to be done. What do we need here? What do we need here? And what do we need here? The first thing this function needs is what value is it that you want me to look up? I want to look up this student ID number. Where do you want to look it up? Now we have a number of choices here. We can look it up by entering in the table name. That table has a name. To insert that table name, I think, no, that didn't work. We can go to formulas, and nope, it's not going to let me do an insert formula here. So I'm going to just, I'll have to click this thing first, okay? And I'm going to go into the students, and I believe this is called just students, and that's the sheet name. Right. And I'm just going to take this whole table. That gave me A2, but I want the whole table. So I'm going to backtrack a little bit here. And I'm going to see what happens if I just type students in here. Because I believe I named the table students. Well, it's not helping me any, so I'm going to have to type it. But I typed it. If you know the table names, that can really help, and this is another reason. And there's some sample data, so that's the right name. You can go select the table. That works just about as well. Now, the next thing that the lookup function wants to know is, okay, you're looking them up in the students table. What column number do you want from that table? What does it mean by column numbers? It's not talking about the A, B, C, D here. Those have nothing to do with it. Okay? It's talking about the column number. I'm looking for the program. So that's column number 1, 2, 3, 4. So in here, you put in just a 4. Often that's just a 2 because the columns or the table is only 2 columns wide. What are we looking up? And what value do we want to return? Okay, so we designated what we want to look up, my student ID number, where in my table. Which column's value do you want? I want the program value. And then finally, is this a range lookup or is this an exact lookup? Those are 2 kinds of lookups. There's a range lookup or exact lookups. In this case, we're looking for this student ID number exactly. If we read the instructions down here, it said, is this a range lookup? If you leave it blank, it assumes you mean true, and it is a range lookup. We don't want a range lookup. We want an exact lookup. So we're going to do false here. You can type it in any case that you want. And notice the dialog box shows you the value that's going to be returned. Here's what you're asking for. Here's the person. Here's the list of the tables. I want column 4, and it's not a range lookup, so it finds IT software developer. Let's see if student number 1005 here is a software developer. They are, so we got the right value. The order of these are sorted by student ID. It really doesn't matter at all. I could rearrange these, sort them by last name. When you're doing an exact lookup, it finds it anyways. As soon as it finds a match for your student ID, regardless of where it is in the list, it stops and returns the appropriate value. That's not always the case with lookups. When we do a range lookup, it stops in different circumstances, and the order can be important. But we're doing exact lookup, so it doesn't matter too much. Okay, back to my student report. I want the student's name. So once again, I'm going to do a lookup, but now I have a little bit more experience. So one of the things I like to do is type equals VL for VLOOKUP, and notice that my little tooltips down here, my IntelliSense, whatever it's called, is giving me suggestions. You probably want VLOOKUP. That's exactly what I want. So I press tab. And then underneath here, it tells me what order I have to put the things in. I could do this with that dialog box. If you forget at any time, once you've brought the VLOOKUP parentheses in here, you can go back to the dialog box. Right, what do you want to look up? I still want to look up this value. Where? I still want to look it up in students, but this time I want index number 2. That's the first name column. Notice I got a Susan here. But it's not a range lookup. And I get Susan's name. Now I could put her last name in this box, but one of the things I like to do is stick these text values together. In programming terms, that's called concatenation, and Excel uses the same terms, and what I did is a little bit of Google search to see how to concatenate, stick strings together in Excel. The way you do that is you use the ampersand. That's a shift 7. I don't recommend putting spaces around this, then things get a little weird. So right after the VLOOKUP, that's the first name, I'm going to concatenate a space, just putting empty, that's just a space between quotation marks. Then another ampersand, and then another VLOOKUP. This time I probably can't go to the dialog box because I got all this other stuff in here, but I think I can figure this out. I still want B3 from the students table. Notice here it's helping me because I'm typing it. Students table, but this time I want column 3, and it's still an exact lookup, so I put in a false. And now it goes out and gets Susan's first and last name, sticks them together, concatenates them, and puts them all together like this so they're not separated. It's just a technique I thought might come in handy for you sometime. Okay, well, let's do another one. For the grade records, these fours, these grade points, have been entered manually. They shouldn't be, because I have a lookup table here that said if you get a B minus in the class, you earn 2.67 grade points. If you get a D plus, you earn 1.33 grade points. So instead of me typing them, this should be a formula, and I should look them up. So I'm going to delete all these that are in here. Press the End key and delete all those. Remember, this is a table, and from the first recording, if you insert a formula here, that formula will automatically be copied down to all of the other cells. I'm going to create this lookup in a couple of different ways. First way I'm going to do it is by highlighting the table. So I'm going to again start with my equals v lookup, press tab. First thing it wants to know is, what do you want to look up? I want to look up this grade, the one from this row. And remember from the first recording that when you click in a table, you get the field name as part of your formula. I could have typed C2 there. It wouldn't make a whole lot of difference. I want the grade. Where do I want to look that up? The next thing it wants to know is, where's the table? Right there. That's what I'm on. Where's the table? It's over here. Now, if you're highlighting the table manually like this, do not include any titles. Just the data. If you include the titles, then grade is an acceptable value, and we don't want that. So only select the data that's in the table. That looks good. And then a comma. Every one of these pieces parts is separated by a comma. So what are you looking up, comma? Where are you looking it up, comma? Which column do you want to send back? Column number 2. Are you doing a range lookup? No. And so there's my formula. I press enter, and I get a bunch of errors. What the heck is going on? Why is this wrong here? And if we look at it, you'll see this is A3 to B14. That's not where that table is. Because of relative referencing, all these formulas have updated. So as I mentioned in the last unit, if you're updating some of these table formulas that are filled in automatically, you should update the very first one. I'm going to make this absolute by pressing the magic F4 key, and this one absolute. Press F4, press enter, and now it updates all my formulas, and all of these now look at the same table in the other worksheet, and everything works. So that's one way to do that. Another way to do it is, before you start this process, give this a range name. So I'm going to call this GV. That's very lame, but the reason I'm giving it a lame name is I'm going to give it a better name in a minute in a different way. So I'm going to call this GV. And then in my formula, I'm going to start over again. Equals V lookup. What do you want to look up? My grade. Where do you want to look it up? In GV. Which column do you want to? Is it exact lookup? No. Get the exact same answer, copies all the way down, but notice that because I used a range name, the absolute reference is automatic. Whenever you use range names, it's automatically an absolute reference, and so I didn't have to do those automatic referencing updates to make it work for all my formulas. So that's a better idea. One final idea is to, and by the way, if you want to get rid of any of these names, go to the name manager, and here's my GV and delete. Delete it, yep. What I discovered when I was practicing this before the recording is, even though I've deleted it, that name still seems to be embedded inside of Excel someplace, and I can't use it again. That's why I gave it that lame name. Now finally what I'm going to do, and this often works well when you're doing lookups, is to have a table. I'm going to insert a table. Didn't have to highlight them in advance, but I did. And there's my table, and I'm going to give this a name. Give it the full name, grade values. And notice when I do tables, I do get the titles. I thought Volker said, don't use the titles when you're doing this, unless it's a table. Now notice here it's now complaining because there's no GV. I'm just going to edit it and type a GR. There's my grade values, press enter, and even though there's headers, the formulas still work because it's a table. If it's a table, then you include the headers. If it's not a table, if it's just a range name that you've defined, then you don't include the headers. Okay, the last thing that I want to show you is not an exact match lookup, but a range lookup. I want to calculate the activities fee for this student. But I want to look that up because there's rules, and the rules are in my little recording notes here, so you can't see them. Maybe I can let you see them. See if that shows up. Okay. So those are my rules. If the student's taking 0 credits, they of course pay $0. If they're taking 1 credit, they pay $10. Anything from 1 to 6, not including 6, is $10. Anything 6 or greater is $20 unless it's also greater than 12, then it's $30. When you build range lookup tables, you have to sort them in increasing order. Okay? And you simply list, this is the bottom area of that range, all values 0. Anything from 1 to 5, you list the bottom value. Everything from 6 to 11, you list the bottom value. Anything greater than 12, you list the bottom value. So write out the ranges that you want. This is often done with shipping. If your stuff weighs 20 pounds, you pay this much. But anything over 20 pounds, you pay this much. Anything over 50 pounds, you pay more. So I'm going to build a table that looks like that. I'm going to go to my lookups, and I'm going to create a new table. And we'll call this activities fees, so there will be a credits column and there'll be a fee column. If you have 0 credits, you pay $0. And then my table said 1 to 5 is $10. 6, $20, and anything over 12 and over is a $30 activity fee. You can format these, you can turn this into a table, you can do all kinds of stuff. So I'm going to boldface this and underline them. Actually, no, I'm going to put a border on them. I want these to be currency, so they look a little nicer. The only thing you don't want to put in these numeric lookups are text like pounds or ounces or euros or anything like that. You can format them, and that doesn't hurt the functionality of the table, but you cannot add text to these things, especially if you're doing calculations. So I'm going to highlight these and give them a name. Again, I could create a data table out of this. In this case, it's so small, I think I'm just going to give it a range name, call it activity fees. Okay. And now I can use that in my student report to determine this student's activities fees. I'm again going to do a lookup. And this time I think I'm going to use the functions. So I'm going to go to fx. And here's my vertical lookup in my most recently used functions. Brings up the dialog box. What do you want to look up? I want to look up their total credits, which is right here, in a table that I named activity fees. It found it. If this doesn't show up, it didn't find it. You didn't type it right. Okay? The downside of using this dialog box is that you cannot get any help here. The little tooltips, the list doesn't show up, and you can't even get a list of the functions from the formulas tab up there. It's in the formula. Now, why is this one available and the other one wasn't? So I can take that out, and then from the formula I can say use activities fees, and that way you don't have to remember it. So go to the data tab and try it, see if it works. I don't know why it didn't work on the first one. Which index do I want? Column 2, that's the most common. In range lookup, yes it is. I could type the word true in here, but if I don't, it assumes true anyway, so I usually leave it blank. And look what my formula looks like. It only has 3 pieces. Look up B9 in the activities fee table and give me the value in column 2. Right now I get a 0 because there's nothing in here. If I type in a 1, I get a $10 fee. Let's format that for currency as well. If I get 2 credits, still $10. 5 credits, still $10. But as soon as I go to 6, it goes to $20. So the way Excel looks at this is it goes down here until it finds a value that's bigger. When I typed 5, is that bigger? No. Is that bigger? No. Is that bigger? Yes. Then it backs up and gives me this value. If I type in 11, is that bigger? No. Is that bigger? Yes. It backs up. It gives me that value. So that's approximately the way it works. When you build these, it's very important that you build them in increasing order and that you only list in here. You can't say 1-5. It doesn't work. You only list in here the bottom value in the range. Let's continue our test. What happens when I get to 11? It's still $20. As soon as I go to 12, it's $30. And if I go to 99, it's still $30. Okay, so we created the table, and that was a range lookup. This is a range lookup. It only has 3 pieces here. We could put a comma true here. It wouldn't make any difference. But if you're doing a range lookup, and personally, for me, they're a little less common. If you're doing a range lookup, you can leave the true part out. Otherwise, you always put a false there for the exact matches. So hopefully that helps you struggle your way through lookup functions. Initially, those are a little confusing for people, but remember, generally, you're looking up a value and grabbing something else from a table. You're looking up a grade, what's its grade point? You're looking up a credits count, what's the corresponding fee? Hope that helps.